we have a great speaker in the house, in our meeting. I will pray and then I will introduce him to us. Shall we pray? Father, in the name of Jesus, I thank you for this great gathering of your people who are meeting via Zoom all over the place in this country from among our churches. And I know, Father, that none of them will be disappointed because each of us will hear a word for this season, a word for our lives, a word for our businesses. Lord, I pray that heaven will meet the earth and the voice of God will be heard, the word of God will be heard. We pray, oh God, that none of us will go away disappointed and confused, but everyone will go saying, yes, I'm encouraged, I'm guided, I'm led, I'm ready to take off. Lord, we thank you for our speaker, Pete. Oh God, we just ask that, Father, you bless him and use him, oh my Father, so that you'll be a blessing to each of us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Yes, coming to speak to us on the topic, positioning your business for investor readiness, is actually our own brother, and our speaker is a son of this continent. I think he's not just a local man, he is a son of this continent. Over the years, he has a big, huge heart for the continent of Africa. He's also a son of Citam, and we are proud of our speaker, Pete Ondeng, with rich religious heritage. We can safely say that used to stay with his father, Richard Ondeng, and now rests every day on him. And I believe he is passing on this to his children. So without much ado, let's welcome Pete Ondeng to come and minister to us. Pete, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Pastor, and welcome everyone to this evening conversation. I call it a conversation because I am not here to give a speech. I don't do well with speeches, and oftentimes I find that it's much easier to speak from the heart. And so I am going to use these few moments that have been given to me to just share, and I trust that God will speak to somebody and to be able to give each of us something that we can walk away with that will add something to our journey. I thank you, Pastor Jacob and the church, for giving me this opportunity. I don't take it lightly. What I want to do is maybe use a couple of minutes to share a little bit of my own testimony in way of introduction, and then dive into this topic, which is actually very close to my heart. The whole idea of entrepreneurship and good business is something that I've walked with for many years. I've seen the good, the bad. I've also had opportunity to advise a number of businesses. I've written a number of things about business, and I hope that will somebody. My background in terms of training is accounting. Some of you may know this. I studied as an accountant many years ago, got my CPA. Actually, I got my CPA in the US. My chance to go to the US is a testimony in itself that I like to share because it is such a powerful testimony. And I'll spend 2 minutes on that. Back in the late 70s, when I was finishing high school, an opportunity came that none of us actually saw. A friend of mine who was the son of a missionary As Pastor Jacob was saying, my father had worked with Citam and many other churches around the country for many years, and he and had many friends in those circles. The son of one of the missionaries, who happened to be a very good friend of mine, passed away a year and a half or so before I was to go to finish high school. Now, this young man was a really close buddy of mine, and it was a real tragic loss. Now, imagine at the time when I finished high school, out of the blues, completely unsolicited, completely unexpected, the parents of this young man come to my parents and they say that the money that we had set aside to put our son through school, to use to put Pete through school. Talk about a gift out of heaven. And so for the next 4 years, I studied in Texas. When a gift of this nature is planted in you, your responsibility is to pass it on. It's a big lesson that it's a hard one for many people to learn, that our blessings come as we bless other people. And many times we block our blessings by receiving a blessing and then sitting with that blessing and making it all yours instead of seeing it as something. Did finish my studies and I began my work there in the US. I worked for 4 years with one of the corporations and then decided to come back home to Kenya. I came back and began to work. And for most of my working life, I've been in the area of what you would call economic development, working with NGOs, working with donor organizations, multilateral organizations in economic development, and also more specifically enterprise and business development. At the age of 30, I did something that in retrospect, looking back, was a turning point for me. You see, when I was 22 years old, sitting with some friends of mine, beginning of a year, setting some goals, I don't know what triggered it. We had decided that we were going to set some 10-year goals for our lives. And for some reason, I had decided that I was going to write a book. I was going to be an author by the time that I was 30 years old. Now, at the age of 29, I saw the time was coming close, and I knew if I was going to achieve this, I would have to move very fast. And so I scrambled around, and I imagined in 1990, around that time, we didn't have internet, we didn't have emails, we didn't have Google and all this kind of thing. But I began scrambling around, piecing together material, actually most of it borrowed from other books, trying to put together a book for no other reason than to fulfill my commitment to myself that I was going to be an author by the time I was 30. I didn't have a subject. So I came up with a couple of topics and I tried those. One didn't work. I tried another one and finally landed on a but they actually don't know where to get information. US or from UK, get a hold of that was actually speaking to Kenyan people. So in my naivety, in my just trying to achieve what I had set out to do, I pieced together a book. Nothing new. I put together a book that borrowed from all these other books I had bought from the bookshops, talking about marketing and talking about things that I knew theoretically. And I pieced it together and self-published a book called How to Start Your Own Small Business. Little did I know that this little book would actually catch on. Somebody at the Daily Nation got wind of it and invited me and said, This is interesting. Would you be interested in writing a weekly column on small business on this same subject? Now imagine I was working at the time for USAID. I had never run a business in my life, but I took on the challenge. And for the next 12 months, I was writing every I could get a hold of on the subject of small business. This was a turning point for me. Why I said this was the hand of God was around that same time that the government was beginning to focus on things like there's a whole ministry that was dealing with technical training and so on. It was known as the Juakali ministry. And suddenly my book and my material began to be used by different people. And at 30, 31, I was being invited to business and so on. And I was overwhelmed because I didn't have the experience, and I also actually was learning as I went. And all I'd arrive and people would look at me with disappointment because this guy they were reading his stuff in the newspaper was some professor or something, and it turns out it's this young man. And so at a lot of the talks I would give, people would ask, "So what business have you run?" And I would always dance around that question because I never really had that experience. So a little bit later on, I did leave my job and I did start a small consulting firm. It didn't do well, but it propelled me into a direction that has enabled me to see and work with businesses from the smallest to some very large businesses. Looking back, I really do give God the glory. I had the opportunity in the mid 90s to Citam. Actually, it was called NPC then, with Pastor Dennis White. It was a tough decision I made, but it was a decision that the Lord had led me to leave my business and decided I would go. I had the privilege of serving as a deacon for one term, and I stepped down and offered myself and served for 2 years as the first business administrator for NPC under, excuse me, under Pastor Dennis White. At the end of that period, I felt with the same conviction that the Lord had led me to make that rather radical decision. I felt the same conviction that my time had come to an end. I needed to move on. And so I asked Pastor White if he would release me. I didn't have a job lined up. And he told me that, please, before you go, help me find someone. Don't just leave like that. So we went on a search, we searched, and the person who we ended up landing on was none other than the man who is now Bishop David Oginde. So David Oginde became the second business administrator of NPC. And from there, the Lord opened a door for me to work for Faulu Kenya, then a very small organization as its chief executive officer. And from there, I went to the Netherlands with my family for 4 years. And that was a really pivotal moment for me because it was actually working in Africa, but living outside of Africa. And knowledge. Things I've heard is that so many of us Africans don't know Africa. And in fact, those of us who are privileged enough to travel outside of our continent will most likely go to Europe or go to the US or other places like that. So we will know much more about the streets of London or New York, and then we will about Zimbabwe or Burkina Faso or Senegal. And so much of what we know about ourselves, much of what we read, much of what is criticized or praised about Africa are things that other people tell us. We read, we watch TV, but we ourselves have not experienced. So this experience actually opened my eyes in an incredible way to see some of the challenges, both in business, socially, but even politically. And that would inspire me to write my second book, which was Africa's Moment. I wrote Africa's Moment the year just before we came back to Kenya. And we came back here, and I wish I had time to share with you the next number of steps that led me to be appointed by President Kibaki's government as the head of the NEPAD Secretariat. That's the New Partnership for Africa's. It was 4 years of working in a space that exposed me to the political good and the tail in so many respects. As the world moves forward with technology and all these things, we're still struggling with feeding ourselves and still struggling just a basic education and how to survive. And so that is what I did for 4 years. And there are a number of other steps that I was led into. And I'm sure some of you will wonder, because you did see me a few years ago stepping into the political arena. I won't go into that, but that's a story for another day. The only thing I will say about that, and I'm going to underscore this as I talk about business, is that there are times when God will call you to do something that is way above your head. That from time to time, you will feel a prompting to do something that does not make sense to other people. And the only thing that God calls us to do when He calls you to do something is to obey. Not because you know how, but because He has said so. Story for another day. So that's generally my journey, my story. And along this way, I had the opportunity to work with quite a number of businesses, particularly experience in the Netherlands where we were working, the organization's mandate money long term. It also did some equity investment in businesses. And so my job was to oversee the Africa portfolio. We had a colleague of mine looking out for Latin America, another person was looking out for Asia, somebody else dealing with Central Europe and so on. And I want to bring this up because of some interesting points that began to strike me even at that time about business in Africa. Because from time to time, after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we would meet as a management team to talk about the issues that we were facing in our portfolios. And I would perhaps have just come back from a trip to Senegal or South Africa to visit some of our projects. And my other colleagues have also traveled, and we're back in the office and we're going around the table talking about issues that we're facing and perhaps projects that are struggling or maybe need additional funding or whatever. And so my colleague from Latin America would talk about maybe a hurricane came by and destroyed a crop. It was a problem. And colleague would go through their list of issues, and often it was something technical or maybe some business is not doing as well as it should, and they're trying to think of how to help it get back up on its feet. And then they would turn to me and say, Pete, how was your trip to Zimbabwe or to Uganda? And again and again, I found myself having to explain that the issues with the projects that I was facing had to do with integrity. They had to do with either somebody who had stolen money or somebody who was playing some game or not being honest. I remember one particular case, we lent a lot of money to a group. This was in Zimbabwe. And the leader of this group was a well-respected Christian person. And as was normal, they would put up some collateral to be able to enable this loan to be advanced. And now a number of years had passed and this project was not paying and there seemed to be some misbehavior. And so we said, we're going to call the security. And so we got a lawyer and began to pursue this, only to discover that the security that had been given to us was a fake title deed. It was a duplicate title deed. And this kind of story began to disturb me because I said, first of all, why we see this? And I couldn't get that out because these people were me. This was me. So I had to ask the question, what is wrong with us? What's wrong with me? Because like they said, that there are many things that will hold a people back. And there's an illustration I've used many times of a picture of a goat that is tied to a tree. A goat that has capacity, it's got strength, it's got the ability to move around. And maybe there's a bush in front of it with some leaves that it can see and it wants to pursue, but it cannot get there because it's tied to this tree. And you can get the picture in your head of this goat struggling to get to these leaves. Very quickly you realize it doesn't matter how many times it goes around that tree. If you don't cut the rope, that goat will not be able to get those leaves. And we have many things that hold us back. And we go around those things. We struggle to achieve success. We struggle to understand why we're held back. And yet there are some ropes that we need to get back to and say, what are we going to do to cut these ropes and to be blessed and to be able to achieve what God designed us to be able to do. In that, I had opportunity to review many business proposals. Many people who are in business, you were to ask them today, what is your biggest problem? What do you need? I can assure you, people who are watching here, see there's some people all in business, and I came and said, what is your main challenge? The vast majority of you would say money. And so often we throw that money obstacle in front of us and don't realize that there's so many other things that will keep us from achieving what we should achieve. And even if we were to be given that money, would we really be able to get to where we want to go? So before we even talk about how to get money, I want to just say one or two things about business. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that I have worked with business and some very large ones. On the small scale, it was my days in microfinance, particularly working who would form groups and would lend them money and they'd struggle to pay back and so on. And back when I got into that business, the government was really pushing the idea of Juakali. Juakali sort of became the solution. It almost became like a discovery. I think there was an ILO report or something that came out and said, you know, there are millions of people working in the informal sector that are not being captured in the national statistics and so on. And so the informal sector became sort of a vogue thing where people began to almost glue. And I remember as far back as then struggling to accept that because I do not know that has grown, that has expanded, has become industrialized, that glorifies or encourages its people to operate the way that our informal sector operates. Now, the informal sector is characterized by very short-term thinking. We used to call it informal sector, Juakali. They're being bandied. It's called hustler. A hustler to me, and I don't want to denigrate or even discourage somebody who's struggling right now. There are many people who are hustling. It's to hustle, sit around and say, I don't have a job. But in many ways, one of the characteristics of hustling is that you're thinking about now. You're thinking about what you can get today. Easy come, easy go. And the nature of informal sector is that people will set up something very quickly, but they can also abandon it very quickly. And so oftentimes it is not something that is visionary. It's not something that is established with a long-term perspective. And it is, if you want to compare it to birds, it's like chickens. Chickens look down while they eat. They pick up whatever is in front of them and they'll keep going. And if they see something to the left, they turn left. As opposed to somebody who is actually doing a legitimate business. And this is what I'm more interested in talking about. Somebody who has a vision, somebody who sees something bigger than themselves. How many of us start things and those things that we're starting are only as big as we are? I had a conversation recently with the leader of an NGO, a person who has done incredibly well as a founder and a manager of this NGO that is working in the health sector. Place where this person has received a lot of recognition and so on, but then you realize that the whole organization would collapse. That to me shows a lack of vision, that you have started a good thing, but you have limited this thing to yourself, and that you cannot see this thing beyond yourself. So if I was going to give some points, the first point that I would make is step back, be still, and allow yourself to see something that is much bigger than you. You know, you can't just wake up today and decide that I'm going to have a vision today. A vision is a revelation. It's a revelation that I believe comes to those who will seek it and those who will ask for it. Do you see yourself as an achiever, somebody who is going to do something that will have lasting impact on society and on the people around you? Or is your business just a way to make some quick bucks, make some money, and what you're doing is really just looking for some money? Now, the first thing then is have a vision. An entrepreneur or a leader without a vision cannot really grow and cannot really take a business far. I remember many business plans that I've helped people to work on, where people would say, this is what we want to do over the next year. And the vision never really, you could never really get there, but this is where I want to go. That to me is a remarkable and a laudable kind of characteristic or trait that I really encourage. So if you're a business person, step back, reflect, pray, ask God to open your eyes to see what you cannot see. You cannot aspire for what you cannot see. And if there's one prayer that I have, and one prayer that I wish we would all have, is to ask God, open my eyes. Open my eyes that I can go beyond this hustler mentality that is being glorified today, that I can go beyond thinking about how to put food on the table and to think about building something that is sustainable, that is bigger than me. That's number one. Number two is something I've touched on already, is integrity. I am asked the question all the time. that business in our society is corrupt. If you want to play against the big boys, you're going to have to play some games that are not completely straight. And I say, shame on you, because that is not true. And if you must do wrong in order to be successful, your business is not worth it. And I would encourage a commitment and a conviction from day one. Means I'll lose it because I stand on principle. A person who is not driven by a principle like that is actually perpetuating and actually encouraging and bringing about the very things that are holding us back already and being part of a story that really we need to be overcoming. Have a vision, have a sense of purpose, have a sense of integrity. But then I also want to say, don't start a business, don't go into a business that you know nothing about. Too many people look around for an opportunity and they jump into it. The people who you see really succeeding in businesses are those who are willing to plow themselves into something, not just the doing, but the learning. I am a bit distressed when I think about whenever I hear somebody saying Africans don't read. This is actually true. We cut corners, we do things and we struggle, and yet there is so much information. And many of us have not grown up with the mindset of absorbing and learning, growing and continuing to see yourself as somebody who is a learning person. Building a learning organization is a very, very important trait for people who make it in business. Learn to read. Let me just throw in here, I say this as a writer, because that's one of the gifts that God has given me, that it is not just tragic that many Africans don't read, but many Africans don't write. So like I was saying earlier, so much of what we learn about the world, about ourselves, is written by other people. I remember sitting with my father, my late father, who passed away last year, to write his book. He was 90 years old. The book is called 90 Years of Grace. And we dug into the life of this man. Finally completed this book. He died at 93, but he left will benefit somebody else. Why would someone scratch when there's that wealth of information that could have been passed on by somebody? So I encourage you, this is just a side note. I encourage you, as you live and walk your journey, note them down, determine that you too will leave something behind that somebody can pick up and build on, even if it's just knowledge that you have gained. It's a very strong thing. So the core subject of today about money. Everybody knows that money is the language of business. Money is also what to invest, to buy, enables you to grow. You need it. We don't serve, we need money. And there are only a handful of ways actually that you can get money. Them for you. Number one is you can steal it. Please put a scratch as you write it down, and we move to the second one. Number two, somebody can give you a gift. A gift, or you can't, is the second way that you can get money to do. And then some people have been fortunate that a friend or a family member or family members have come together and have been able to give money and say, no strings attached. go ahead and do business. The likelihood of that happening is very slim. So let's also put that aside. A third way to get money is to borrow money. Borrowing money is actually a transaction. And the lender lends money to the borrower with one objective, that you will pay me back. And the only question that the lender really needs to have answered is, how are you going to pay me back? Many people want to go to the bank. They want to go, please lend me some money to this and that. Can you answer the question, how will you pay me back? Then there is a follow-up question to that. What if you don't? That's actually, with all the forms and things that the banks will make you fill and so on, and go through all these hoops to even apply for a loan, there are only two questions they're really interested in. How are you going to pay this back? And what if you don't? And this is why banks will demand collateral. Because the collateral is simply saying, I trust you, you will pay this back. But in the event you don't, I'm going to take your house, car, or I'm going to take your. Unfortunately, many of us do not have that fallback answer. You don't have the collateral or the asset that you can actually give to somebody. And so you cannot be able to answer the question of what happens if I can't pay you back. And so borrowing becomes very difficult. And let me tell you why borrowing is difficult in this country of ours. Part of it is simply because of what I talked about. Country of Bangladesh in the late 90s. An incredible experience. On the very last day of our visit, we had gone to visit one of these very large microfinance programs. It's called the Grameen Bank, very famous program that many people who were in the microfinance field were benchmarking against. And on the final day of our visit, we were actually sitting with a group of women. I shared this in a video recently, so some of you may have heard this story. Sitting with a group of women who were, like they usually do here, borrowing, paying back, and so on. We didn't understand their language, so the interpreter would translate for us. And as we were watching this, and it was hot, we were sweaty, one of the women took a loan. And something struck me, because back in Kenya, one of the things we were struggling with was how to get paid back. And in the event that people don't pay back, what does the group do? Do they go take the guy's furniture? The lender gets the money back. So I asked the question. I said, this woman here just took a loan. What happens if she doesn't pay back? So the translator, she turns to the women and translates my question, and they start a conversation. And I'm a bit taken aback, because I'm thinking as a straightforward question. Then she comes back to me and said, the women are asking, can you rephrase your question? So I said, this woman here just took a loan. I'm assuming she's going to pay it back. What happens if she doesn't pay it back? What will they do? She goes back to them, and in a language we don't understand, they start having this animated conversation. And then she comes back to me and says, the women are asking, why would she not pay back the money? I was stunned, because back home in my program, Faulu, and this is the same with some of the other emerging ones, Kenya Women's Finance Trust, KREP, and all these others, our borrowers, their default question was not, why would I not pay back? The default question was, what I do? What would happen if I don't pay back? So the default is that we are looking to swindle somebody. And that has become a cultural problem. So borrowing is very difficult. I can assure you, banks, especially now during this corona period, are not very interested in lending money. But anyone would lend money, that is the fourth way to get money, which many of us have not thought about, is what we call equity. That is where somebody puts money in your business, not as a gift, not as a loan, not as stolen money, but they put money in your business to become part owner with you. An equity investor is interested in the success of the business, but because of that, they're not just going to hand the money to you and walk away. And this is where so many people make a mistake. You're looking for money, and there are people who do have excess money that they would invest. And there are a number of private equities and organizations that are actually existing. They call them venture capital or whatever you want to. There are different terminologies. Their interest is in to put money in something that has growth potential, but that will enable them to walk alongside you as a co-owner. This, for some reason, has not succeeded in this country. Let me tell you something that may come as a surprise to some of you. When we got our independence, Kenya had about 65 companies on the stock exchange, something like 65 or 63. Today, if you go to count how many companies are listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, Securities Exchange is called now, it's about 8. Now you'd ask yourself, are not more companies that are being listed? Being listed on the stock exchange basically is putting your business out there so that investors can become co-owners, shareholders in a company. By buying shares, they become co-owners with you. One of the problems is that so many businesses are not operating transparently. One of the requirements of being listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange is that you're audited with an authentic audit firm, that your financials and how you manage is transparent, and that all your hands are on the table. How many businesses have I worked with that are keeping 2 sets of books, that are perhaps paying an auditor to prepare for them something that they can present to somebody as an audit? The truth of the matter is, if I was going to put money in your business as an investor, I would demand that I sit on your board. I would demand that I see the books and that I be able to make no major decisions are made without me. So too many people then struggle with, this is my business. So you want the cake and you want to eat it. You want to grow, you want an investor, but you don't want to let go of those things that you want to do on the side. Environment thing, the environment in which we exist in, but also partly, like I said, it's a cultural thing. I was working with clients of mine. They had money from an equity investor. And this equity investor did not have the capacity, they didn't have the right people to go and monitor the businesses. So they'd hire me as a consultant to meet with their client on a quarterly basis, just to see how are things going, what are the issues you're facing, can I see the books, so that I can report back to the investor. So one day I sat down with this couple. It's a young couple, Indian couple, and we were having lunch, and so I asked them, how are things in the last quarter? And the guy says to me, Pete, I want to shoot straight with you. You see, the things that we're selling, there are a lot of people coming here who are willing to buy it at a lower price and not pay VAT, as long as they don't demand a receipt. So a lot of their sales were actually off the books. And he says the people who demand receipts, they have to pay the VAT, they pay a higher price. Now, here's the problem. If we don't have this side off the record sales, there is some people who are importing goods, the same stuff that we're making here. They're importing them by not paying duty at the port. They're able to undersell us. If we're charging everybody VAT and all this, we lose business. And he asked me to go back to the investor and say, what do you want to do? And it was a situation where the investor had to struggle because they were not going to be complicit, to be part of this thing that was defrauding the government of taxes. But at the same time, they had put money in this business. They wanted it to survive. What would you do? And it was a real dilemma. So we do have a problem in the environment that we Christian business people, we people who are have the opportunity to shine a light in the business environment, down the is the way business is done. So that's just an example about the challenges we face there. So transparency is a big thing. I've also talked about the need for accurate record keeping. So many people actually don't even keep good records. And it's something that perhaps you don't need to worry about until the day you need somebody to invest. And you're going to find that you cannot cook books. Accounting, as an accountant myself, accounting doesn't lie. And somewhere it will show that your records are not up to date. So I'm sort of going from one thing to another, and I realize that I can go on all night long. But let me just sort of sum it up in a certain way and then maybe see if there's some questions or some discussion that we can have, because maybe that will be more of a fruitful discussion. I want to sum it up in this way. We have an opportunity in this country, opportunity in ways that so many other countries do not have. If you look at how we're endowed, and when I say opportunity, I'm talking about need. The needs that people have are so many, and those needs are filled by businesses. So too many people say, I want business, and think about structure or thinking about what they're going to build or the shop or this and that without giving sufficient thought about the need. It begins with the need. Some people call it demand. What need are you trying to solve? You'll be surprised how many people who will, I have met, and even if you were to ask them yourself, just meet them on the spot, somebody who's doing business, and ask them, what business are you in? And oftentimes the description is what they do, what they do on a day-to-day basis. I'm making this or I'm growing this. And business to me is about selling, period. If you're not selling, you're not in business. You can have the biggest supermarket in town. If you're not selling, you're not in business. If there's one thing you need to learn, is to sell. And so I say, if you cannot answer that question quickly, that this is the problem I'm solving. Then you'll not be able to clearly think about how big is the problem, how big is the opportunity. And so once you've defined what it is that you're trying to fulfill, and it is something that you can hold with some conviction that I want to be a solution provider in this area, then a business plan begins to make sense. I'll close with here. Want to go, and part of it is because he was having problems with his employment. And so he heard that there was somebody who is selling greenhouses. It's actually a kit. They have greenhouses, they'll give you the pipes for water, they give you some little training and so on how to do this, and some information on soil management and blah, blah, blah. He got very excited. And for weeks, he was spending time on the construction of this thing and laying this thing out and buying the seeds and putting all this in place. And then the things began to grow. And I asked him, so who are you going to sell them to? He said, the market. I said, no, tell me who. And so he says, I'll sell them to the hotels. And I said, which ones? This guy had not even thought about which hotel. And if he had even thought of a specific hotel, he had not gone to find out, where do they buy their things? How much do they pay for those things? And how do you spend your investment and time and money before answering the question of who is going to buy my goods? You are not in business by opening a kiosk. You're in business when you're selling, whether you have a kiosk or not. And that's something that I drum into people when I'm training on entrepreneurship, that I'd rather not have anything around me, but I know who I'm selling to. I know how I'm going to get my products to them. I know what I expect them to pay. I know exactly how much it's for. I know how much money I'm. This business 101, I've packed in 30, 40, I don't know how long I've been speaking. A lot of things that ideally would have required us to spend a weekend or maybe a whole day just to unpack and so on. COVID doesn't allow us to do that right now, but I'm trusting that we'll be able to do that. Before I close, Pastor Jacob, coming back to the prayer that you made in the beginning, back in the 90s, it was very interesting that Pastor White, who really believed in the holistic mandate of the church, we used to have Sunday evening services. And Sunday evening services were often testimony services or family services. People would come and give testimonies, and they'll be preaching and so on. But it was a very wonderful time. And at one point, he said, there's so many people coming to the church asking for help, asking for money. So the church it's not oriented to deal with this kind of thing. And he said, why don't we have business training in church? And it wasn't something that he planned to do on Saturday afternoon for those who are interested. He says, we're bringing this into the church because he says, it is my people perish for lack of knowledge. And for several weeks, we actually had seminars. Instead of having a sermon, we'd have training. We'd go into business. I wish I would see more of that. So thank you so much. I know I've rambled a bit. I don't talk with notes. So if I repeated myself in certain places, if I've jumped, if I've told too many stories, you forgive me. I'd be happy to take any questions, and I hand back to you, Pastor.
Thank you, Pete, for wonderful presentation. I know, as you said, we cannot unpack much on the time limitation that we have, but certainly you've shared, and I'm seeing the comments there that very powerful nuggets for business. You know, Pastor Sol from Citam Kisi saying a vision is a revelation. So we are picking a few pointers here and there. But 2 questions, maybe because of our limited time. Maybe you can touch on these 2 issues that was raised, one by Protas. He says, can you elaborate a few common money lies that hold us back from God-backed business growth? Elaborate a few common money lies that hold us back from God-backed business growth. And then second question is it possible to actually do business in integrity despite the challenges that are out there, maybe from our competitors? Is that a reason to discourage us, or are we able to do it the right way and still be successful? Maybe share 1 or 2 thoughts about that.
Thank you. I like the GOAT. Can you mute, please? Illustrations I've spoken about in many forums, because of the story it tells of life. That picture of a goat held back, and there's so many things that hold us back. Many of these things that hold us back are mental things. There are things that we have grown with, or things that we have adopted, or there are lifestyles. One of them that relates with money is the inability to save. It is actually like a disease, that it really doesn't matter how much money you have coming through your hands. That lack of discipline in being able to put something aside, being perpetually broke. And broke to me should not mean that I have no money. It means I have no money to spend. But the fact that I'm not able to put aside even a little bit is almost the definition of what I was talking about at chicken. That what lands in front of me, I eat. And if there's one thing that I would encourage you to teach your children, if you have not learned it yourself, is that whatever you receive, doesn't matter how small, put 10% in the tzedakah. Put 10% and to those who are prepared. And there are many people who will have opportunities that will come and they cannot seize them because they're never prepared. And it's a challenge, I must confess, even for me. Sometimes when I have a small amount of money with me, I'm thinking, what is saving 500 shillings or saving? It's that discipline of saying, I am thinking about the future. And if we cannot think about the future, it's very difficult to be able to be helped to succeed in something like business. So that is one rope, that rope of consumption. And that is a deadly one that actually in some communities, it is just almost like the definition. I say some communities, my own community, people like flashy things. And we put more value in what I can get now than what I can possibly be able to achieve in the future. Other things that hold us back can be even just psychological. I say a lot of these things have to do with the mind, because there's somebody who once said that what the mind can conceive and believe the mind can achieve. This was said by someone who's not a Christian, but it could have come straight out of the Bible, because that is basically what the Bible teaches us. That as a man thinks, projects himself future, as a man continues to think, so he remains. So the exercise of believing and stretching yourself to think beyond yourself and to think, I don't know, I said the statement and I'll repeat it again, that you cannot aspire for what you cannot see. And if there's one thing that impresses me about the story of blind Bartimaeus in the Bible, a man who has been blind since birth, a man who probably didn't have a job, didn't have food, probably didn't have a place to sleep, was asked, "What would you have me do for you?" And the man didn't look well. The man responded to Jesus, "That I might see. The rest I'll take care of. Help me to see." So I would really encourage, if I was to leave you with one thing, take time to ask God to open your mind. Open your mind to see what you cannot see, because you will not aspire beyond what you can see. The second question is a tough one, because we preach about it, we talk about it, we're always talking about integrity and corruption and this and that, and many of us see corruption as somebody else, something out there. Is it really possible to do business in an honest way? I want to say that that's a question that I don't want to entertain, because we shouldn't even be living. We are called to live in this world, but we're called to live as light. Jesus did not say, because there is darkness, there is no point in even trying. If there's one thing that dispels darkness, it is light. Light a candle, darkness flees. And so too many of us will hide our candle simply because there's too much darkness. And we say, let's just conform. And I think it is a shame, and maybe it is high time that we began to see more people standing up, not just about not taking bribes and so on, but getting out there as advocates and becoming even activists in pushing back what we're seeing as the things that are eroding our lives in this country. Don't get me started on politics, but I really believe that's one place where Christians are needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Maybe one more question as we wrap up. Gladys is asking, how can I get a loan or convince a financial provider to give a loan for a startup? And she touches on because there's an issue of collateral. What would you have to say about that? I think one of the challenges our small businesses are facing is getting that initial capital, and maybe you can advise.
I'll preface my answer by saying that there are no simple answers that fits everybody's situation, and that sometimes will make sense to somebody and doesn't help somebody else. But let me say, as a general rule, if you're starting a business, you don't want to alone. And sometimes you need to borrow to augment or to support what. But very few people will just invest in something that doesn't exist. A startup is and you're saying that I have a dream. can somebody give money into this and back? That's really the promise you're making. If you're borrowing, haven't started and you have not put any skin in the game, you have not stuck yourself or put yourself in a situation where you stand to lose your own stuff if this thing doesn't work, it's very difficult to convince somebody else to lend you money. So I know that Gladys' situation I don't know where you are with your business, but many startup businesses, when you are from day one, a loan is not something that you borrow and then you wait for the business to grow so you can pay it back. Often you and the next month or 2 months. And when you start paying a loan back before you've generated any income, what you're really doing is using the same loan to pay back what you borrowed, and you're not helping yourself. So I find it very difficult to lend you money, and that's why many even groups that would, whether it's table banking or these microfinance programs, will require that you join for maybe 6 months and save some money with them. SACCO, same thing. Prove that you can save, that you can generate, that you can discipline yourself, and then you'll be able to borrow. So I would really encourage, if you don't have any money at all and you're just maybe just earning small amounts of money, join something. It could be a SACCO and become part of a community. Many people have done incredible things because of this collective, what they call collective borrowing schemes like SACCOs, and these groups that are able to leverage their collective savings to borrow money.
Thank you. I think that is comprehensively touched. I think the other question that comes from Emma is asking that she says, thank you for profound knowledge on business. She's asking, could you elaborate a bit more about equity? I know maybe just a short statement about equity. And I know there are several people who must be having questions.
Yeah, equity, your business, if you were to get it, the business, first of all, must be a formal registered business with shares. And somebody giving you equity is not so much giving you, they're buying shares in your company. And so many people who will invest in this kind of way will not take over the whole business. Oftentimes they'll maybe take 40% of the business or something like that, and then walk alongside with you. But before I put my money in your business, I want to see everything on the table. And this is where so many people falter. And that's why I say, I talked about the Nairobi Securities Exchange. The Nairobi Securities Exchange created a window, a separate window for small businesses, because people were asking the requirements that you have for businesses to be listed so that the public can invest in them is too high for people who are just down here. So they lowered the requirements and to enable smaller businesses to be able to raise money there. Very few companies have actually even taken it up, simply because I think one of the reasons is the fact that it requires disciplines, business disciplines. When somebody else is coming to be a co-investor with you, they want to be co-own boss. Just wake up at 9 o'clock and decide today I'm not going in. You're basically working for the business, and this other person is investing So equity is just another word for saying buying shares. in your company. Many equity investors who are doing it as a business will invest sometimes for 4 or 5 years with the idea that if I put in this money here and 2 million shillings, then I can sell that 40% because the business has grown. I'll maybe sell it for 5 million. I'll make my money on the exit. Or either you buying them out by then or another investor will buy them out. But too many of us are not prepared to walk the discipline of formality. And it's one of the tragedies because we cannot really build this economy unless we are lifting our people to begin to operate at that level. We're still here encouraging people to be hustlers. I bring that up again. I think you know my feelings about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there's two last questions as we close because our time is well spent. One is from Betty. She's asking, is crowdfunding viable in Kenya for startups? And then secondly, maybe touch on our strategic position as Kenya in this region. I think, are there opportunities that may arise from our position in the regional sense? Because I see we are a gateway to many nations. There are business opportunities that are waiting.
Yeah, crowdfunding is a concept that was made popular. You have a business person who needs $15,000, and it's not one person who's going to invest in it. It could be 100 people. So this business is put on some online platform where people can see it, and I can invest $100. Somebody else invests $100, and it's all sort of comes in, and when it's all reaches $15,000, which is what you needed, this is then passed on to you. This is a very novel thing, and I would actually encourage you. I have not focused in that area for some time, and I don't know what has developed in that space, but it is there are a number of companies that were doing this. In some countries, it's working quite well, and I would encourage you to look and see what opportunities there are in that space. I will say this about the organization that I was working with, is that because these were people who are investing through the internet, they don't know the business. So the company that I was working with would have local agents who would be the contact people for these businesses that are looking for loans. So a local agent would receive an application for somebody for $5,000. He would do the business review and so on and put it on the platform. And it was functioning so well because within a couple of days, the $5,000 thing was full. That particular company collapsed. Why? Because of fraud. Fraud where? Right here in Kenya. It was 7 different African countries. And one of the agents here who was being said as one of the best, was finding so many businesses that were put on the platform. It turns out they were actually fraudulent businesses, things that he was creating himself and putting them up there, getting this money and pocketing it. Then when we discovered this, he packed up and ran to South Africa. It's heartbreaking, but it's a kind of environment that we have. Your question about the region, I would encourage you yes, Kenya is just so well positioned and so well endowed, but we're losing it. We're losing our position because of our small thinking, our short-term thinking. We're not strategic. But I don't want to encourage you to start thinking at that level, that sort of geopolitical regional level. Right now, laying before us. And I can tell you this, you can put it in the bank, crisis that's coming up. In almost any aspect of food. There is no, it's regional, it's global. And that's one area that you'd say there are parts of this world that cannot grow food. We can. Whether you're going to be the grower, whether you're going to be the distributor, whether you're going to find a niche in being a packager, whether you're going to be somebody who is simply a broker, a retailer, a stockist, whatever. These are all businesses along that chain, a transporter of certain things, whether you want to set up some kind of refrigeration, something that serves those who are in certain sectors. The food sector is so promising. And it's one area that is not going to go down anytime soon. And so when I say that we are blessed with oil and so many and sunshine, doesn't mean everybody rush to start digging in the farm, but that's one area that we should, if you're looking for an opportunity, the agribusiness is open for business.